So this section is about finding solutions. Everything has an equal sign. And one thing we're starting to look at is the difference between whether the question has a single x or if there's an x squared. And generally, if there's a single x, we're looking for one answer. If there's an x squared, we could have up to two answers. Not always, but could. So first one is kind of going back to grade 8. We've got two steps. We've got to reverse the 9. We do the opposite to both sides. And second step, divide by 7. So this one here, very similar, except now we have x's on both sides. Now, like we practiced on the last one, we can combine like terms, and I'm going to move this one to this side because it's smaller. If I subtract 2x, I still have a positive value. You could move it to the other side. I prefer this way. I'm going to subtract 4. And then divide by 5. So again, the question had a single x, no x squared. We end up with one solution for both of those. This one's a little more complicated. We've got distributive, we've got like terms on both sides. So I'm going to start with the brackets. I cannot add these, they're not like terms, so I'm going to distribute. And my goal is to get like terms. I'm going to put all the x's to the left side, and I'm going to take the numbers, the constants, and move them to the right side. You choose which side you go to. When you move something to the other side, it always reverses. So 3x becomes minus 3x, 27 becomes minus 27. So our final answer, x equals -1/2. So now we're getting into an x squared question. This we can expect two answers, not always, but we can expect it. So same thing, we always follow SAMDEB. BEDMAS backwards. And so we start with the adding, subtracting. Next up, we've got an exponent and multiplication. We have to do the multiplication first, so we divide by 7. And the reverse of an x squared is the square root both sides. We will get into this in more detail in the next unit, but when we square root 64, we could have two possible answers. -8 squared is positive 64, positive 8 squared is 64. So keep in mind, if you square root, you get two answers, positive and negative. This one here, again, we're going to start with adding, subtracting. Now, the opposite of a square root is a square. Same thing back here, but we did the reverse. So we're going to square both sides. And if you square both sides, this and the square root cancel, and we just get 36 on the other side. Divide by 3. We get x equals 12. So the opposite of a square is square root. We get two answers, positive and negative. And with the square root, the opposite is a square. And we get the answer there. We will get into more detail in Unit 3 on equations with radicals. This one here has a little more complicated. We always want to start with adding, subtracting. So we're going to start with the -3. Now you might see the +4 inside. That has invisible brackets inside the square root, which means that will be the last thing that we do. Even though it's adding and subtracting, it's adding and subtracting inside brackets. So add 3 to both sides. Now again, we're going to leave the inside the radical for last, invisible brackets. I'm going to divide by 2. And again, we have to do the exponent before the brackets. So I'm going to square both sides and get 25 on the other side. So the square on this side cancels the square root. The square on this side gets me 25. And last step, and because it's inside the radical, now we're going to do the -4 and subtract 4 from the other side. So it's always following SAMDEB. There's invisible brackets inside a square root if there's a plus or minus sign. So start with the outside, start with the adding, subtracting, the multiplication, division, then go to the square root. Okay, so this section is a little bit different. We're focused on x squareds. We're probably going to have 2 answers for most of these questions. And I want to start with this one. Even though it's got 2 different letters, this is the basis of everything else in this section. So if we have a times b equals 0, the only way we can get 0 is if we multiply by 0. So maybe it's a times 0 or b times 0, but something has to be 0. The problem is we don't know which one. So the answer to this, something is 0. Maybe both, but there has to be one that's 0. So we're going to use that idea going on to this one. Now, on the previous page, we solved this using algebra, and we're going to do factoring method, and we're going to get the same answers, but this is the start of this section. So going back to this, if we have 2 numbers multiplying to 0, like we have here, this number times this number, equaling 0, something has to be 0. So let's say it's the first one. I'm just going to put x minus 5 equals 0, move the 5 over, and there's my solution. Now I have to do it for both of them. So if we look at this, the answer has to be 5, or it has to be -5. It has to be one of them, but we don't know which one. So in this case, we have 2 solutions, 5, -5, plus or minus 5. So we're going to go to this one now. It's not like this one. It is a trinomial. So we're going to factor the trinomial. And it's negative, so both are negative. And I get my 2 factors. So factor it first. We get the 2 answers. Now, keep in mind, every question like this, we need an equal to 0. If we don't have that equal to 0, this principle doesn't work. So next up, I'm going to take this, x minus 6 equals 0, move the 6 over, solution x equals 6. Then I do the other side. Move the 7 over. I have 2 answers, x equals 6, x equals 7. That's what we're doing. We can only do this if it's equal 0. Then we factor. Then we get 2 answers. And again, we only do this when there's an x squared. Then we factor. So this one, again, we've got a trinomial. We get our 2 binomials. We factored it. Each one gives us an answer. And what you'll notice is I'm just going to move the 9 over. You can start doing this in your head without writing it down. As soon as you see the factor x plus 9, the solution is x equals -9. It's always the opposite. X minus 2 in brackets, that's factor. Positive 2 is the solution. So that's basically it. We're factoring each one. Again, it has to be equal to 0. This one here, we have a GCF. Now, this messes some people up. If there's a GCF, doesn't matter what it is, if it's a monomial, we divide by 5, it's always 0. If there's a monomial with an x, 0 is one of the solutions. and the other side. So two solutions, 0 and 5. So I'm just going to skip. I know it's going to be positive 6, negative 6. That's my solution. So for every single one of these, if you see an x squared, you want to make sure it's equal to 0, factor it, get usually two answers. This one has already been done. It's already been factored, and you'll notice there's a coefficient. This is going to make it a little more complicated. It's going to give us a fraction. So I'm going to go through step by step. I'm going to make this equal to 0, move the 7 over, negative 7, divide by 2. So keep in mind, if there's a coefficient, you're probably going to get a fraction or a decimal. And so what I'll say for these, if it's a nice decimal, I'll let you write it like that. But this one would be a never ending. You'd have to round. Keep it as a fraction. I want the fraction unless you can do an exact number in decimal form. No rounding. And so this one is an easier version. This one is the same thing, except now we've got a harder trinomial to factor. So this one, as it is, doesn't factor, and we will get into these much later in the course. Right now, to make it factorable, so once you've got it factored, then we can go to the solutions. Each one will provide one solution. And we get a fraction. This one over here. And leave it in fraction form unless you can get a nice decimal, no rounding. So that's this unit. Factor where you can. Make sure that you have an equal to 0 before you start factoring, and get your two solutions.